Everyone who's joining us. This is a podcast recording with one of our members who is here to talk about a very specific topic that's relevant to all publishers. I'm joined today by Redican and Malachy Fallon from Xavier Society for the Blind. Aisling is Xavier's fundraising and communications manager, and Malachy is executive director of the New York City-based nonprofit, which has been providing accessible reading materials to blind and visually impaired people of faith for nearly 125 years. Congratulations on that.
Thank you.
Providing books in accessible formats has been at the heart of the Society's unique mission since its founding. Here's why we're coming together today. Next year, legal changes in the European Union provide new accessibility requirements for sellers of ebooks and e-readers in the EU. We'll discuss more about that later, but first, Aisling and Malachy, they're going to tell us a bit more about Xavier Society and the mission. It's all yours.
Thanks, Therese. So Xavier Society for the Blind was founded in 1900 by a blind woman who taught blind children, and her name was Margaret Coffey. And she teamed up with a Jesuit priest named Father Joseph Stottleman, and he was kind of a visionary. He worked with deaf children, and Margaret was very frustrated because her students didn't have access to the same faith formation materials that sighted children had access to. So Margaret and Father Stottleman got together, and Margaret was actually our first donor, and with her life savings, they were able to purchase the technology needed at that time, so a Braille press, and they created the most important Catholic book of their day, which was the Baltimore Catechism.
Of course.
Yeah, it was a good start for us, and really since that time, our mission hasn't changed, right? So, and I'm paraphrasing our mission statement. Our mission is to provide the Word of God, so sort of an aspirational mission statement, and the best of Roman Catholic teaching to blind and visually impaired people of all faiths. And we say we do that in whatever format they require, whatever format they request. And we try to do that, as quickly as we can and fulfill as many requests as we can. And we're always trying to increase our audience. So we're trying to get that accessible material out to the widest possible audience.
That sounds like a very ambitious but very worthwhile mission. Yeah. So how many people do you serve today, and how does one get accessible material from Xavier Society?
Yeah, so we serve around 2,500 people on a regular basis. And they're registered as our active patrons. And typically what will happen is they'll call us up and they'll request a book, and whatever format they need, whether it's Braille or audio, we'll try and make available to them, especially if it's not already yet available. And believe it or not, Braille is typically easier to produce, especially if the requested title isn't like a textbook and it doesn't have, graphics or pictures, tables, things like that. Whereas audio, it's a little more extensive. We work with volunteer readers and freelance audio engineers, and sometimes, that process takes up to a year to produce an audiobook.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So what does your demand look like? Like what sort of volume are we talking about in terms of what your patrons request?
Sure. So we've got about 1,400 titles in our catalog in Braille, and a similar amount in audio.
Wow.
Yeah. And last year we produced 74 new titles in Braille and about 55 new titles in audiobook. And we fulfilled just over 3,400 requests from individual patrons.
Wow.
And the top titles, or the most requested titles on an annual basis, we'll get requests for between 10, and 20 of those books from our patrons. So we're not really talking a huge volume, but for an organization like ours, we've got 5 full-time employees and 1 part-time employees. It's a lot to keep up with.
Oh, I can only imagine. I recall from my publishing days getting calls from you, Malachy, asking if we could send over copies of certain books that were being requested from things that the bishops had published recently. So that kind of leads to the next question. How do you work with our member publishers, if at all? How does that sharing of titles happen?
Right, right. So as I was saying, you know, it's like a lot of things in life, it depends, right? So we'd like to work more directly with Catholic publishers in particular, because we think you know, we've got that consistency of mission. So we're always looking for ways to collaborate and create accessible titles for our patrons. We think it's good for our patrons, and we think it's, you know, potentially a way for Catholic publishers to expand their market as well. So what we'd like to do, and we've done it, you know, informally, you know, at the ACP membership meetings and sort of one-on-one things like that. But we'd like to start conversations with the Catholic publishers to figure out ways in which we can collaborate and what sort of the next steps are. Right now, if a patron, going back to Ashlyn's example, if a patron requests a book in Braille, we'll try to contact the publisher and say, well, do you have an electronic file available? Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. If they do have those files available electronically, it helps us, you know, expedite the process in terms of providing the book in Braille. So sometimes those files are available to us and sometimes they're not. But that's what we're trying to do, is figure out ways where we can work with the publishers to get those files more readily available, have them more readily available, and therefore get them in accessible formats more quickly.
That makes a lot of sense. So in general, I'm imagining that technology has been a real help in terms of making things more available to the visually impaired. How, generally speaking, have changes in technology changed your process?
That's a great question, and it's something that we're trying to work through. You know, technology is always changing, and we're not talking huge amount of volumes here, but we are trying to stay true to our mission statement and provide our patrons, you know, with whatever they need in whatever format that may be. So, and we want to do this in as timely a manner as possible. So, the requested format could be Braille, audio, large print, or it could be something else like an EPUB, or a format that can be used on an e-reader or a screen reader or a refreshable Braille display. But the definition of accessible is always expanding.
Yeah. Yeah, and you know, we've been working with a couple of organizations to try to create a standard of, you know, what that format is, right? That electronic format. So that we could come up with a consistent process to do this more easily, more efficiently, more quickly, to get those accessible formats out to our patrons. And you know, there are tools, there are software and tools that exist to do that. But it's a matter of defining the standard, defining the process in order to do it on a consistent basis. Because as Ash mentioned, like, we want to be able to work in different accessible formats. There are already a variety of accessible formats, and who knows what, you know, will be created in the future. Back to your question in terms of how is technology changing?
Yeah, no, that makes sense. It seems like publishing is a field where the changes in technology have really forced everybody to talk about standards. You know, it includes printers, it includes folks like you. So if publishers adopted the process that you're describing here, would that reduce the demand for your services or not?
Possibly, but you know, that would be a good thing, you know, in a way, because it would mean that there are more materials out there accessible to blind and visually impaired people. But I think that there will always be a need for an organization like Xavier Society for the Blind. So as long as the work gets done, whether that's the publishers that do it or we do it, and if we could find a way to work cooperatively, that would be even better.
That makes a lot of sense. So you mentioned earlier about the European Union and some changes going on there. How might these changes affect book publishers, especially our folks? 'Cause I'm betting they don't know a whole lot about what's happening over in the EU.
Right, right. Well, I think it was back in April of 2019 where the European Parliament passed a directive saying that any seller into the market, into the European market, had to make their products, their goods and products accessible, right? So for publishers, the way it's defined is that means ebooks and e-readers. They have to be accessible. And those requirements come into effect for anything that's being sold into the market after June 28th of next year. So as you mentioned, it affects EPUBs, ebooks, and dedicated software, as well as e-readers. And there's a whole list of what the requirements are in terms of technology and just, how is accessibility defined, right? The different ways that it can be defined and what does that mean? So there's a whole host of items and issues that the legislation and directive deals with. And we're not experts in European Union law, and we know a little bit about the technology and accessibility, so I won't bore folks with the details, but just know that it's coming, right? So the way we're looking at it, it's certainly gaining, it's clear it's gaining momentum in the European Union, and we suspect it's just a matter of time before it gets some traction in the United States as well. So we think it's a good thing, right? If it creates more accessible material, more accessible books in more accessible formats for people who are blind and visually impaired. So we think it's a real opportunity, for us, given our position and our mission, to work more closely with Catholic publishers, to start with, to sort of figure this out, and how we can do more for all of our patrons and customers. So we think it's a real opportunity, and sort of the next steps is, okay, let's start having the conversation with publishers and get the right people to the table, right? It might not be Ash and I, but it might be someone from our technology side or production side to talk to the right folks at the Catholic publishers and get the ball rolling on this.
That makes a lot of sense. That makes a ton of sense. So let's round out this conversation. Any last words of advice to folks as they're listening to this? Maybe some first questions that you want them to consider, and then also what would be the best way to get in touch with y'all?
Great. Yeah, I mean, I think, the way we're looking at it is we're all in this together, right? So we have very consistent missions. And as Ash said, if it reduces the demand for what we do, that's fine, because we'll find other things to do and other ways to help. But it's really trying to come up with a standard across the industry in terms of how we define these consistent formats and electronic files. And then the easiest way to get in touch with the Xavier Society is just to call me directly. My number is 212-502-7655, and my email address is malachy@xaviersocietyfortheblind.org. So,
Great.
we're around. We're very accessible. We're always here and willing to talk about it. One of our board members, Paul Fontaine, who you met at the last conference, this is really in his wheelhouse, and he's been helping us figure it out and talk to folks about the next step. So it's something that we're really excited about, and we think we can make it happen if we get together with the right folks. So that's why we appreciate this opportunity to speak to you about it, Therese.
That's great. So for those of you who are listening, let me just remind you about how to get in touch with Xavier Society for the Blind and Malachy. Make sure you're logged into the CatholicPublishers.org website as a member, and you can go to the directory under members and search, do a keyword search or a filter for Xavier Society for the Blind. It'll give you a link to their website, and I believe you'll be able to actually send an email from there too. And you can go directly to their website at xaviersocietyfortheblind.org. And I'm guessing there's probably a contact link or page somewhere where folks can get in touch with you.
Yep, there is. And of course, there's also a donate button. So we have
All
to
right,
put that in there
always.
because we are a nonprofit and we rely on donations to provide all of our materials free of charge. So
Good plug there. Yeah, Malachy. So folks, thank you Malachy and Aisling for sharing this with us today. This is really important information. I am sure that this is not going to go away at any near future point. So we probably will be circling back to this sometime again soon. Folks, contact them, get in touch with them, find out what would work best with your process and which of your titles would be best served to be in their inventory and library of resources for their patrons. So that is the end of our conversation for today. Thank you so much for being with us. And if you have any questions, you can get in touch with Malachy or Aisling, or you can get in touch with me through CatholicPublishers.org.
great. Thank